He wasn't invited to the funeral. He didn't even receive a message when the heart that once beat in rhythm with the Texas soil went still. But when he saw the photo of the casket, polished oak, flags folded sharp, it wasn't the military ribbons or mourners in boots and ties that froze him. It was the engraving burned into the wood beneath the name John Miller Beloved, father of Nathan and Brian. Nathan Miller hadn't stepped foot on the family ranch in over a decade. The land his grandfather had cleared by hand now stretched across 500 acres of sunburnt pasture and barbed wire. It was a place once filled with early morning feedings, endless repairs, and the kind of silence only old men and hard-working sons knew how to share. But Nathan was no longer considered a son in that house. He had driven 14 hours straight from New Mexico after reading the obituary posted online, a public note with no mention of him. The official statement listed surviving family members: a wife, one son, 3 grandchildren, no room left for the eldest, outside the Baptist church in Cedar Ridge, parked along the gravel shoulder. Nathan sat still in his truck. His hands were trembling, slightly on the steering wheel. He hadn't expected the heat to feel so familiar, or the chapel bells to sound like they used to on Sunday mornings when his mother hummed hymns while making cornbread. He wore black, a dark dress shirt, clean jeans, and a blazer that still carried a faint scent of cedar from his closet. On the lapel, a small rainbow pin glinted in the sunlight, barely visible, but enough. When he stepped toward the church entrance, heads turned, he knew many of those faces. Neighbors, former ranch hands, even a few of his high school classmates, now older and hardened by weather and time. It was Brian who met him at the steps, his younger brother. Same jawline, same walk, but none of the warmth that used to pass between them. Brian stood tall in his tailored suit, the kind their father would have called city clothes. "You don't belong here," Brian said flatly, blocking the doorway. "You left this family a long time ago." Nathan didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence between them stretched like the plains, wide, dry, unforgiving. Behind them, the funeral had begun. Through the open doors, Nathan heard the pastor's voice and then the choir. But when the casket was wheeled forward, he saw it, etched deep into the wood, his name, Nathan. He didn't move, just stood there, still as the cotton fields in August. While something inside him split in two, no one explained the engraving. No one offered him a seat. But the land remembered. It remembered the boy who fixed fences before school, the boy who used to name every calf born each spring, the boy who once dreamed of making that land a place that welcomed everyone, and now it was calling him home. Have you ever returned to a place where your name had already been erased? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it. And if this story moved you, follow Heart Stories for more true stories that heal in silence and speak louder than words. Nathan didn't go home that night, not to the motel where he'd left his bag, not to any house with his last name on the mailbox. Instead, he drove until the fields grew wide again, until the asphalt gave way to gravel and the sky opened like a wound. And when he reached the rusted gate with the crooked Miller Ranch sign, he parked and stepped out, letting the heat press against his skin like memory. The barn was still there, the blue one. It stood at the far edge of the property, beyond the hay sheds and silos, where the land dipped gently like a forgotten promise. The paint had faded to a dull slate, but the color hadn't left him. That shade of blue was the first thing he ever painted with his father, the summer before he turned 12. It took 2 weeks, 3 brushes, and more laughter than any year since. He hadn't seen it in years, but it hadn't forgotten him. The lock on the door was gone, either broken or deliberately removed. When Nathan pushed it open, the hinges groaned, heavy with time. Inside, the air smelled of soil and cedar, of old leather and rain that never fully dried. Light filtered through cracks in the wooden walls, painting dusty lines across the floor. And there, nailed to the central beam, was the box, a steel container, labeled only by a strip of duct tape with his name scrawled across it in handwriting he hadn't seen in 15 years. John Miller's handwriting. Hard, slanted, unmistakable. His breath caught in his throat. He reached out, fingertips grazing the cold metal before unlatching it. Inside were items so small, so seemingly ordinary, they might have meant nothing to anyone else. A folded sketch of a new irrigation system he once drew in high school, one his father had brushed off as too fancy for a ranch like ours. A faded cloth, the hand-stitched handkerchief his mother embroidered when he was a boy, with the letters in M in pale blue thread. A photo taken the summer before everything changed. Nathan standing in the barn, covered in mud, holding a newborn calf and laughing. Tucked beneath it all, a single piece of notebook paper, torn from a spiral pad, lined in blue. His father's handwriting again, this time softer, hesitant. I kept these. Couldn't say it then, but you had ideas worth listening to. I just didn't know how to let go of the old way. If you find this, you still matter to this place, more than they know. Nathan sat down on an overturned crate, the barn silent except for the wind brushing against the walls. He held the note in both hands, eyes closed, letting the words sink beneath the skin. He had spent so many years believing his absence meant rejection, that his father's silence was final. But this barn, this dusty, half-forgotten corner of Texas, had remembered him better than any obituary ever could. He looked around. The feed troughs were empty. Tools hung unevenly from the wall. The ground was dry, neglected, as if the barn itself had been waiting. And Nathan understood, in that quiet moment, what needed to come next. Not a fight, not revenge, a return, a reclamation, not of property, but of presence. He stepped out into the sunlight and stared back toward the main house. It looked smaller now, not just from distance, but from time. The people inside it had tried to erase him, but the land, the place that shaped him, had held space in ways they never could. That night, he didn't cry, he didn't rage. He simply walked the perimeter of the barn with steady feet, brushing his hand along the wooden beams as he went. And when he reached the back wall, where he and his father once carved their initials into the baseboard, he knelt. There it was, still there, J.M.N.M., etched side by side. The storm hadn't washed it away. The wind hadn't worn it down. It had waited, like the land always does. And now, so would he. The letter burned in his pocket like a second heartbeat. Nathan had folded it carefully, pressed it flat, and slid it behind his driver's license, as if holding it there might anchor something deeper. Not just memory, not just pain, but the quiet, aching truth that someone who never said "I'm sorry" may still have meant to. 2 days passed since the funeral. He didn't return to the service. He didn't speak to his brother. He didn't step onto the front porch of the house he was born in, but he did walk the fields. He let the dust settle around his boots, and he waited. It wasn't long before the attorney called. Not just any attorney, Weaver and Sloan, the same firm the Miller family had worked with 4 generations. The voice on the phone was professional, clipped, but something in the tone shifted when Nathan gave his name. "I see, the man said. Then I suppose you'd want to attend the reading of the will." It was scheduled for Tuesday morning at the county courthouse. He arrived early, dressed in the same black shirt, this time with his sleeves rolled up. The rainbow pin still rested on his lapel, brighter now under courthouse lights than it had been in the Texas sun. Inside, the air was thick with perfume, wood polish, and tension. Brian was already seated, flanked by his wife and their 2 sons. Their mother, Nathan's former stepmother, wore a veil despite the fact that no one else had. She didn't look at him. Neither did Brian. The lawyer cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice echoing off wood-paneled walls and into the hearts of people who didn't want to hear what came next. There were 2 wills, one dated 8 years ago, naming Brian as the sole inheritor of the ranch, equipment, livestock, and the entirety of the land portfolio. The second will was dated only 4 months prior. It was not notarized in the traditional way, but it came with a video file, time-stamped and backed by a digital authentication process. The password to unlock it had only been released after the funeral. Weaver inserted the flash drive into the monitor. The screen lit up, and there he was. John Miller. Older, face thinner, voice slower, but unmistakable. A man shaped by soil and sweat, now looking into a lens like it was the face of time itself. "If you're watching this," he began, "then I'm gone. I reckon most of you never thought I'd do something like this. But I've been thinking about legacy, about mistakes, and about the people we hurt, not because we hate them, but because we're too afraid to look at what love really is." He paused. "I said some things I wish I hadn't. Kept my mouth shut when I should have spoken. I'm not proud of that. But Nathan, if you're listening, I never stopped being your father. I was just too damn stubborn to be a good one." The room was silent. You could hear the rustle of paper, the slow exhale of a child too young to understand inheritance, but old enough to sense that something had shifted. Then the screen faded to black. The lawyer picked up the second will, the one with Nathan's name, listing him as joint heir to the ranch, with oversight of any future sale or development. Brian stood up. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "A video doesn't change legal standing." But Weaver looked him dead in the eye. "Actually, in this state, and under these circumstances, it does." The room fractured, not into yelling, not yet, but into silence sharp enough to cut through bone. Nathan didn't smile, didn't move. He didn't come for money, or buildings, or land. He came to see if any piece of his father had survived the silence. And now, it seemed, it had. Not in legal language, but in truth. The kind spoken too late, but not unspoken altogether. Outside, the Texas wind moved through the courthouse oaks. Nathan stepped into it slowly, his boots tracing a path his father once walked in shadow. He wasn't angry. He wasn't triumphant. He was seen. And for a man long erased, that was worth more than any acre of land. The real funeral happened weeks after the one with the flags and folded hands. No velvet-lined casket, no hymns, no rows of black suits, just a stretch of dry field behind the barn and a folding chair that squeaked when Nathan sat in it. He hadn't told anyone at first, not even the lawyer, not Brian, not the community that had watched him disappear one summer and never asked why. But word travels fast in towns where people still remember the name carved into fence posts and branding irons. Nathan didn't call it a memorial. He didn't use the word ceremony. He just said this: "If anyone wants to come by and sit with me, I'll be behind the blue barn on Sunday. Bring your stories or your silence." That morning, he brought a wooden stool and a coffee thermos. He wore a denim shirt and the same rainbow pin. The grass hadn't been cut, and the wind kept catching in it like breath that didn't quite know how to release. At first, it was just him, his job. Then around midday, someone approached. It was Clara, the daughter of the foreman who worked for the Millers for decades. She didn't say anything, just nodded and placed a jar of blackberry jam on the crate next to him. Then came Mrs. Dunley, who used to run the feed store. Then Jonah, who was once the only other openly gay boy in the county, and who Nathan had kissed behind the school bleachers the year everything fell apart. By sundown, there were 20 folding chairs. Most weren't filled, but they didn't have to be. They faced an old photo taped gently to the side of the barn, John Miller holding a calf, a boy by his side, both smiling like nothing could ever break them. People shared stories. Some about John, hard to work with, generous when no one asked. Some about Nathan, the quiet one, always drawing maps in the dirt, always sneaking animal sugar cubes behind his dad's back. And then there was silence. Not the sharp silence of rejection. The kind that sits with you, that listens. A boy no older than 10 approached just as the sky began to turn violet. He had a buzz cut and wide, curious eyes. Nathan didn't recognize him. He handed Nathan a folded piece of paper and ran back toward his parents. Nathan unfolded it. It was a drawing. A man in a cowboy hat standing next to another man with a rainbow pin. Above them, a house, trees, a sun that looked too big for the sky, and scrawled beneath it in red marker, "It looks better when there's both of you." Nathan stared at it for a long time. The real legacy wasn't about property lines. It wasn't about which son got which building. It was about what you made room for, even when it cost you everything. When the last chair was folded, when the wind had settled into a hush, Nathan stood alone before the photo and whispered something no one else could hear. "You could have shown up for me, but you left me a space instead. I filled it." Later that night, he packed up the drawing, the stool, and the last of the coffee. He left the barn unlocked. He didn't need to hide what had always belonged to him. Not anymore. Nathan never wanted the land. That was the truth. He didn't drive across state lines and walk through funeral shadows to fight over acreage or cows or rows of rusted tractors. He came for something no paper could promise. Recognition. Not from a lawyer, not from a town, from the man who once taught him how to rope and mend and keep his emotions locked in a box beneath the porch. But the box had been opened now, and the consequences were just beginning. Weeks passed. The sun changed its angle, and the summer faded into the golden hush of early fall. Nathan spent his mornings on the porch of the old foreman's house, the only structure on the property left unlocked. He didn't move into the main home. He didn't touch the master bedroom. Some ghosts weren't meant to be disturbed. Then, one afternoon, Brian showed up. He didn't knock, just stood at the edge of the gravel drive, arms crossed, eyes hard. "You humiliated us," he said. "On camera, in court." "You think Dad would have wanted that?" Nathan didn't answer. Not because he didn't have words, but because he'd already used them when it counted. Brian stepped closer. "Fine," he continued, voice lower. "You win. You get your half. But I'm not selling. Not to you, not ever. So we're stuck with each other." But Nathan had already made his decision. "I'm not staying," he said, quietly. "I'm gifting my half to someone else." Brian's face changed. Confusion, suspicion, then something colder. "To who?" Nathan stepped aside. Behind him, a pickup truck rumbled into the yard. Out stepped a man, tall, dark-skinned, with thick glasses and gentle hands. He looked around the ranch like it was made of poetry. His name was Jerome, a local teacher, a gay black man who'd been pushed off 2 different properties when neighbors didn't feel comfortable. Nathan had met him at the courthouse, both waiting in silence outside the deed office. "I want someone who understands what it means to build something where they were told they didn't belong," Nathan said, voice even. "He's starting a community garden, an education center for rural kids. I want this land to mean something beyond a bloodline." Brian didn't speak. He looked at Jerome, then at Nathan, his jaw clenched. Then he turned and walked away, kicking dust as he went. That night, Nathan packed the last of his belongings. Before leaving, he placed the drawing the little boy had given him, the one of 2 men standing beneath an oversized sun, into a frame and hung it in the barn. Let it be the last thing people saw when they entered. Not names, not titles, but a vision, one that didn't need forgiveness or permission. Just space for you all. As he drove away past the fence he once mended with teenage hands, past the field where he first learned how to lose and still keep going, he didn't look back, because some victories aren't loud. They're not about revenge or getting even. They're about saying, "I was here, and I left it better than I found it." Have you ever walked away? Not because you lost, but because you already won in your own way. Share your journey below. Let someone know that leaving doesn't mean giving up. It can mean rising. Follow Heart Stories for more true stories of dignity, quiet power, and the courage to rewrite what family never finished.